Thank you, Mayor and Council. Thank you for joining us tonight for the Tuesday, September 8th Council briefing. We have 4 items that we're hoping to get through tonight before the regular council meeting starts up at 7 p.m. The first item that we'd like to brief you on is no parking on First Street as part of an initiative from the downtown CRA. I do have Bill Mann, who is the executive director for the CRA, who is here to talk about this item. And I will turn the floor over to you, Bill.
Okay. A couple of things. I just want to run over a few points before we do a little Q&A on it. Host has asked you to start my video. I thought I did start it.
And Bill, we do have the graphic to put up as well.
Okay, great. Okay, first thing, this concept of guiding where delivery trucks can park was introduced by one of our CRA members who happens to live in the Metropolitan. So he kind of sees the functionality from his bird's eye point of view daily. And we discussed it, and he actually did a little research. He looked at the city of Key West to how they did that type of delivery regulation, because Key West, everybody knows, is very, very heavily pedestrian.
Okay.
So before we had a workshop to discuss it further, but before we did that, I came up with a flyer and we attached our draft basic regulations that you see before you, or that you have in your packages. And in the flyer, we circulated it to downtown business owners, and then we asked them to provide it to their deliverers, because I have no way of doing a canvas inventory of who all delivers what to who downtown. So that was the most expeditious way to get it. And through contact with them and follow-up, they have made sufficient outreach to the people that would be affected by this ordinance or by the regulation. And the flyer informed everybody who got it that there was going to be a virtual CRA workshop on July the 15th, which was held. And then we were actually going to discuss the draft regulation at our regular meeting on July 27th. And I will note that no businesses or suppliers or deliverers participated in either meeting. I did get comments of support from the owner of Beachside Swimwear, which is on the northwest corner or southwest corner of 2nd Avenue North and 1st Street. And I got positive support from Bob Tilka, who is actually the manager of 4 of our downtown bars. And he said they thought it was something that they could work with. We did get one email expressing some concern from one supplier, which is Southern Glazer Wine and Spirits. I'm not familiar with them. I'm familiar with some of the companies, but Southern Glazer's off my radar. And her comments were that she was concerned with possible safety issues for her employees. And she asked me to provide a map. And I had developed this map for y'all and for the CRA to understand where we were talking about allowing and where we were talking about restricting parking. And once I sent her that email, I haven't received any comments back from her. So that was the only, it wasn't negative, it was more inquisitive. That's the only other comments I got than the 2 positive comments I got from a bar manager and one of our retail owners. And basically tonight, after we review it, the CRA is simply asking the city council if they would be willing to direct staff to prepare the necessary city code amendment to implement these or some set of delivery parking regulations. Now, with that being said, I just kind of want to, I'm not going to go over line by line what the regulations are, because I think y'all see them. But the intent is to eliminate delivery parking on 1st and 2nd Streets, not just 1st Street, and have delivery vehicles use either the customer's parking lots, which we do have available in a lot of cases, or where they're not available, to utilize certain avenues between 1st Street and 2nd Streets for their delivery parking. And it's hard to tell on the map because I did it on an aerial, but it came up, the regulation came up, and where we wanted to steer people were based on good habits of a majority of the delivery parking trucks. Now, you may or may not notice it, but when you drive down 3rd Avenue North from 3rd Street to 1st Street, when you get between the Metropolitan and the Ritz, some days you'll go by there and there will be 2 beer trucks parked in the very middle, like the center line of the street right away. But that right away is big enough that 2-way traffic can go around them on both sides. And any of these avenues, with the exception of 4th Avenue, have significantly less traffic or interference from other vehicles or pedestrians or bikes or skaters than they do on 1st Street, because everybody knows our condition on 1st Street. We got the police department involved fairly early on to make sure we weren't doing anything that was not enforceable. And they have assured me that with proper signage that they feel comfortable, they can enforce it. And with our regulations, this would not be a uniform traffic citation. This would be a local code citation. So it would be a parking issue that if we couldn't get resolved, it would go to our magistrate. They wouldn't end up in traffic court downtown, which is something our the police department requested. We have not worked on the penalty. The city attorney and I talked about it, and we were considering maybe $100 for the first penalty and $250 for the second. But it basically, it's just, this is what we've come up with. We've come up with it in COVID. I wanted to give you some good pictures of this parking interference, but because of COVID and the, the downturn of all that little First Street economy, I haven't really had the opportunity to catch any good pictures about what we were talking about, like back in February and March before all this happened. If you get 2 trucks on the same block, it just screws everything up. And without having curbs on First Street, you've got bikes going up on the street, you got skaters going up on the street and getting up. It's a pretty hazardous situation. So we did make the exception for mail service trucks and like FedEx and UPS, or we haven't made them. We're proposing them to be made. The people that are in and out in 5 seconds, not that have to go in and get a manager to review their inventory, may take 2 or 3 trips. And I guess just the final thing is just a reminder, Jacksonville Beach is not a unique downtown environment. There are downtown areas where some of these people have to bust their delivery trucks up to 2 blocks to get to their restaurant because that's where the available parking is. So we just thought it might be a reasonable compromise to still keep people fairly proximate to the businesses they serve, but at the same time, just getting that stop-start situation on First Street alleviated. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions if I can.
And before we go into questions, again, council, the direction we're seeking tonight is whether or not this is something that you'd like to consider by having something formally brought in front of you for further consideration. With that being said, I see that Councilor Doherty has his hand raised.
I do. Hello, everybody. How you doing?
Okay.
Hey, yeah, this is a great idea for somebody that's worked on First Street for 20 years. I definitely see the benefit in having some type of order to how the businesses get their deliveries. Even a small place like ours would get 5 or 6 trucks in one day. So I can only imagine some of the larger establishments and the hotels, once they're built, how much chaos that could bring if it remains unchecked. The only concerns I have, or maybe not even concerns, only suggestions I have is possibly to demarcate some loading zones, because just looking at this map, Bill, while it's pretty good, there are areas where there are going to be cars parked, and the last thing we want to do is have 3 or 4 trucks backed up and people trying to leave, and upsetting people. Another idea, maybe times for delivery. Now you see people delivering from 8 in the morning until 7, 8 at night. Other cities have specific times where they're where people are allowed to deliver. The company mentioned Southern Wine and Spirits. They're the biggest liquor company in Florida. So I can see why they reached out to you, but I don't think we're really placing anybody in any undue hardship by making the delivery personnel walk a few blocks. I would just like to see it kind of earmarked so there isn't any chaos when it comes to 3 and 4 trucks pulling up at the same time, because we're in danger of actually creating bottlenecks then if there's only specific streets that they can park in. And as far as like using business parking lots, I mean, there's not really many that I can think of on First Street that can hold, maybe with the exception of Sneakers, that can hold delivery trucks. So I'd like to see the city show the initiative and actually just list where the parking lots are or the loading zones are. And I think that would go a long way for us as business owners to be able to explain to these companies where they're supposed to park. If that makes sense.
Yes, sir. It does.
Thank you.
Can I ask you one question? You said Southern Wine and Spirits, is that Southern Glazer? I just wasn't familiar with their.
Yeah, so
that's them. Okay, I didn't mean to misrepresent them as a minor distributor, because if that's Southern, then yeah, they're big. They're very big.
Yeah, they changed their name like about 2 years ago. So they merged with Diageo. I'm sure that doesn't impress you, but that's the history. All right, thank you.
Next hand is Mayor Latham.
Thanks, Mike. Hey, Bill, it looks like the parking penalty would be significantly higher than what we would typically charge for a parking ticket. Is it our intent to keep it differentiated in a higher impact level, a bigger hammer, if you will, for the
Yes, sir.
dent?
Yes, sir. That was the intent, not necessarily to that level, but that's just the first one. Chris and the city attorney and I had discussed it. And we're like, well, maybe the first round will be $100, because if it's not, they're not going to, if there's no punitive measure to it. And I don't imagine, I guess it would be between the individual driver and his company. We were talking about, well, who would actually have to pay the ticket? I would imagine the company, if the company knew that the driver was aware of the regs, they'd probably put it off on the driver, which would be pretty good encouragement to park where you're supposed to.
Yeah, 10-4. All right,
Now,
thank
I don't know
you.
about 3 strikes you're out. You can't just prohibit them from say, hey, I'm sorry, you can't park down here anymore. So I guess your company can't supply it. So I don't think we could have a 3 strikes you're out type of scenario, but that's something that Chris and I would refine. The biggest point is, unless we've got buy-in, we don't want to go any further down this rabbit hole.
10-4. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I'm not seeing any other hands raised. Does anyone have an objection to this coming forward to council for consideration? Bill, sounds like you've got your new hand raised, City Attorney Ambrosio.
Hi, Mike. I didn't want to interrupt any council member, but just to add that this citation would be enforced locally through our magistrate system, because we're not going to be issuing, a uniform traffic citation ticket that would be processed through the courts downtown in Jacksonville. So this would be a magistrate hearing if we had to enforce it in terms of a truck driver refusing to pay the fine. Just wanted to point that out. That'll all be worked into the ordinance, because of course it's a local ordinance that we would be asking our law enforcement officers to enforce, and we'll just process it and handle it through our magistrate system.
And Councilor Dumont, I see you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I really like Keith's idea of the time slots, when they accept deliveries and when you don't. It stops them from delivering during rush hour, like busy times during visitors. I like the idea conceptually of marking off loading and unloading zones. I just don't know how confusing that will be, because the loading and unloading zones are kind of right where already the parking spots are on the avenues. So as long as there's a clear recognition, different colored lines, clear signs, I think it's a great idea. I thought it was part of one of the vision plans somewhere that it would only be on the avenues and not the streets from a long time ago, but I'm glad that it's coming forward again.
There's no other hands raised. Bill, I think you have your direction.
Thank you, sir. Sierra, I appreciate your support. Thank y'all.
Thanks, Bill. Item 2 on our agenda for discussion tonight is the city attorney's first annual review. Here to talk a little bit about that is the city attorney, Chris Ambrosio. Chris, I'll turn the floor over to you. Chris, you're currently muted.
Okay, we're approaching the October 21st annual date of my first year of employment, and the Director of Human Resources and I, Ann, met to discuss about moving towards that date and the things that we need to do as required by the employment agreement and some of the procedures and processes that we should have in place. So to inform the council, Ann and I met with the mayor to game plan about a way of moving forward to provide the council with an annual summary review and report, and then also some other information, which I'll tell you in a second. But our first meeting with the mayor, we came to some ideas of how to go about doing this as a first go around. And then this was the mayor, Ann and I. And then after that, I thought about it for a couple of days, and I was getting an uneasy feeling about not following, or uneasy feeling, questioning whether we're doing this the right way. And I don't want to make a misstep on the first go around. So I contacted the Attorney General's office and I asked them to guide me on how this should be handled in terms of an annual review, reporting it to council. How do we go about providing the information to council? How is it addressed by council? other information, I'd like to present to council a proposed amendment to my employment agreement. So I reviewed all of this with the Attorney General's office. And so the Attorney General's office and I agree with the Attorney General's opinion about how this should be handled. So here's what they recommend, is that step one, we do exactly what we're doing now, which is that I address it with you on this September 8th briefing and present to you this topic, and that I present to you what the Attorney General office recommends. Step two is that this week I submit to the council as a whole body my annual report and year in review, and a financial report, a proposed amendment to my agreement, and then Ann separately is going to be submitting to council a collection of her department directors' summary review of me and remarks and statements about me and the services and the work that was provided and rendered. So all of that would be provided to the council members this week. Then the Attorney General's office suggested that we have a discussion on those topics at a public meeting, which is essentially just a public briefing between council and the city attorney. It would be noticed publicly, so the public would be aware of it, but there'd be no public participation. And the General's office suggested that we could add that on to the end of the September 14th meeting that's pre-existing, or it can be a special set meeting, but that it should just be publicly noticed so that we're not doing any one-on-one meetings, and that the discussion is held in the public, but the discussion is only between me and my 7 clients. Then, and you can have, that can go on as long as you'd like. And I can answer all the questions, any questions you have about all the materials that you would have received this week. So that was step 2. Then step 3 would be a proposed amendment to the agreement, employment agreement, which would actually be an item placed on a typical city council agenda meeting. So that can be added to an October 5th or October 19th agenda in order to have it at least reviewed and voted on before October 21st. So those are the suggestions of the Attorney General, and I wanted to share that with the council tonight, and then hear from you and follow, your instruction and your opinions. But it's different. It's very different from what we originally conceived of in terms of going through an annual review, an annual report, meeting with council members, and just some other plans that we thought were going to work out fine. But I really wanted to follow what the Attorney General's suggestions are and recommendations, and what their experience is, and what they have approved in the past for dozens of other city attorneys. So that's the information I wanted to share with you tonight, and I want to hear from any and all of you about any of that.
Counselor Doherty has his hand raised, but that's from the previous item. If not, you have the floor.
Yeah, it's not. Sorry. I did put it down briefly. Chris, I just had a quick question, and something that's been on my mind here, obviously for the last few months. And do you think that how has our pandemic affected your job? Obviously, you had an impression of what it was going to be when you took the job last year. Has our virtual world helped or hindered your performance this year? And do you think do you think we should factor that into a review, and how would we actually quantify that?
Yes, I would say, well, I'd say that it impacted my job 100%. The way my office was operating up to, I'd say, the end of February, we were, incredibly productive and getting lots of work done with every department. Things were flying. And then in March, it became 2 jobs. So my office was regular city business, and then an entirely second position, which was manage and survive COVID-19. And honestly, and you'll see this in my report and the materials I'll submit to council, but my job turned into a 70-hour work week, quite honestly. There was a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week aspect to it in which our police officers, our fire marshal, our code enforcement officers were working round the clock. Mark Evans and GP had 24/7 access to me, and believe me, we were engaged in that. And the COVID-19 changed this position incredibly. And of course, I never foresaw it, but it was either do or die. And, I think we've all been really successful council members. So yes, it changed my world. But yeah. And then the virtual work, I mean, my teammates, my department directors, my city manager and deputy manager, we have all together made it work virtually just wonderfully. And some of the employees and staff and directors that may have been working remotely, we don't miss a beat. I always point to the finance department because they happen to be right next door to my office, but they're so effective and efficient virtually. I honestly never know who's in the office or who's working from home. We haven't missed a beat. Clerk's office as well. I honestly never know who in the clerk's office is at home or working remotely or working in the office because it's been effective. Mike's led the charge in that. So virtually hasn't changed a thing. Of course, I needed to adapt and design virtual meetings and scripts and follow governing protocols on how to conduct the virtual meetings, comply with the law. I had to do those things, but we've worked it out.
Everybody's done a great job in City Hall, and hopefully this time next year, or not even next year, hopefully in a couple of months, we're back to some semblance of normality. Because I know it's tiresome, but a lot of people don't think about how much extra work goes into things. Just for example, putting these meetings together. There's so many moving parts. But I appreciate your honesty, and I look forward to receiving that information from you. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And I just wanted to point out that it's not just me. I mean, there's nights that I think I'm the only one working here, and I during these past 5 months of the real worst months. And then I look down the hallway and Ashley's still in her office. She's still working. She's been working here since, all morning, all night. So there's a lot of people involved in making sure the city ran and continues to run a big team effort.
Next hand raised is Councilor Nichols.
I just want to say, I think you've done an outstanding job, especially considering the circumstances. I've talked to some people at the other cities, and you've really helped their attorneys and stuff. And I think everybody's been following your lead at throughout the beaches. And I just think you've just done an outstanding job. And I know, Phil negotiated your initial stuff. And if you need to have a lead for the council, I think Phil would be the right person to continue that lead for the council.
Thank you. Thank you for the compliment. Thank you. I'd like to point out that working with Zach and Brenna was tremendous. We all turned to each other when, we were all trying to figure this out, but working with both of them was a benefit for all three cities as we tried to help all three cities, survive and come through and do the right thing for our businesses, our residents, our employees, follow the law, interpret the law correctly. So it's been a team effort with respect to reaction to literally a global crisis that impacted us locally.
So Chris, is the direction that you're seeking from the council, whether or not they're okay with the process as you laid it out tonight, and get a little feedback as to whether or not they like the concept of adding this as a special item at the end of the September 14th meeting, and then perhaps as an actual action item on the agenda for the 19th?
Right. So the direction I'm seeking is first approval to follow the Attorney General's recommendation. And yes, Mike, to have a special set briefing at the end of the September 14th budget approval, because it appears that should go pretty quickly. So the rest that we could have an hour or 2 hours, however long the council would like, for a special briefing between council and attorney. It would be a public virtual briefing where they can ask and they discuss anything at all with respect to the materials that I'll be supplying this week and that Ann will be submitting to them as well. Then, if they're so inclined to have a proposed amendment submitted on the regular council agenda of either the 5th or the 19th, depending whatever council would like. But the Attorney General's suggestion is that it be submitted prior to October 21st.
And I see Counselor Vogelsang has his hand raised.
Just a quick question, just budget wise and Chris wise. So I would assume you're going to ask for a raise. Do we need to have that in our notice of that prior to budget issues as far as negotiation goes, for whether that's me or somebody else doing it again, negotiating his salary going forward? Mike, I'll lean on you for that. Just budget wise, do we need to incorporate that in prior to approval of the budget?
Actually, I have an answer to that because I checked with AJ. AJ said that he has no problem with being able to adjust as necessary. He has room to adjust. So I wanted to clear that with him a couple weeks ago, and he said yes. He said he doesn't have a concern. He'll be able to make adjustments depending on whatever the council decides with respect to a raise.
Okay, perfect. Thanks.
Yeah. Oh, and sorry, he also said that he could be available for the any of the discussions that we would plan in the future for either the approval of the proposed amendment. Of course, he'll be there for that September 14th meeting, as you know, he'll be on board already for his budget, and then he can stay on for any discussion if the council were to have budget questions as part of the overall year in review and summary. So he can be available for any of those future meetings. That's it, actually.
I saw a few thumbs go up originally that they were okay with the process, and I'm seeing some other heads nod. So Chris, I think you have the direction that the procedure you've laid out tonight is the one that should be followed.
Okay.
Like it's just locking in those dates for
Right.
the briefing, and then ultimately an action item in front of council. And we'll work with Chris to make sure that that gets scheduled accordingly.
Excellent. So I will prepare a notice of a city council and city attorney briefing topic to follow the September 14th budget meeting, in which the city council and the city attorney will discuss the annual year in review and the materials that I'm going to provide this week. That way we would have done what the Attorney General suggested, which is publicly notice it, conduct the discussions between council and attorney in public. Of course, I can't get into the details of certain litigation and claims, but don't worry, you'll see there's going to be 500 other things for us to talk about. So I'll prepare that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That takes us through item number 2 on the briefing for tonight. Item 3 is related to parks assessment. You may recall that several months ago, I believe it was before the pandemic started, or right around the same time, one of the tasks that was provided to our Recreation and Parks Department was to perform a parks assessment so that the council could have a pretty good understanding of the condition and the investments that have been made at each of the park facilities throughout the city. Jason Fatides and his team did an excellent job of putting together a very comprehensive parks assessment report. We tried to make sure that it was given to you all well in advance so that you'd have an opportunity to look at it in advance of the council briefing tonight, in case you had questions that you wanted to answer, or you had any more detailed conversation for this evening. With that, Jason, I'll turn the floor over to you if you want to talk a little bit about maybe the components of the assessment or the approach your staff took.
Thank you, Mike. So we went back and listened to the direction that council gave us at the briefing. I think it was back in February. And you specifically wanted us to look at the shape that our parks were in and how we improve our utilization of the parks. So with that in mind, we looked at 13 of our parks. What it did not include was the golf course, the cemeteries, the medians, oceanfront restrooms, and other city properties that Parks maintains. We paid very careful attention to the survey. We thought it was good feedback. We had about 349 responses, and out of 349, we got 270 comments or suggestions that are listed twice in the assessment. Once where they relate to a specific park, and then again, we consolidated them in the appendix by subject. I'm just going to touch on a couple of things that, this brought to light for us and what we've done already, and then perhaps we can hear council's comments about our recommendations and our summary. But what has resulted from this is, one, we were very surprised to learn that a lot of our residents feel some of our parks are unsafe. Parks' mission is safety and maintenance. And when we got the results of the survey back, about 15% thought they were unsafe, and then others thought that they weren't that well maintained. When we looked into what specifically unsafe was, judging by the comments, it was mostly because of our vagrancy problems, specifically at Gonzalez Park, and then, to a lesser extent, but also at Latham and Seawalk. And so what we did there to try and mitigate that somewhat is the city attorneys worked on a new code for parks, or Code of Ordinance, Chapter 20. We tried to address some language that could give our police department some, teeth to, administer the rules. So I think that may be on the agenda tonight, or it may be tabled for later, but we've got some specific language. He worked with the police department in crafting that. We hope to mitigate that problem. We also started a pesticide program. I'm excited about this because we're using our expertise from the golf course. I don't think we'll see the fruits of this program until maybe early next spring. We are going to hire we have some vacancies in staff, and so we're going to hire specific irrigation specialists to help us there with Trevor Hughes overseeing that department. I think that's going to improve the aesthetic appeal of our parks and make them greener and more appealing. The other thing that we've done is increase the inspections of our park superintendent. He was on a bi-weekly schedule. We've asked him to increase it to a weekly, the reason being because some of the safety issues with parents on the playgrounds, seeing, rusted nails sticking out, loose boards. If he does it every 10 days, he might miss that. So we're hoping that with the increased frequency, that will reduce that somewhat. In addition, we are going to post a telephone number at each of our parks where we have a playground, so that, a parent can call in and say, you guys have got a problem, need to address it right away. And together with that, we're thinking of putting a suggestion box at our parks. And then finally, the other big maintenance issue was the condition of the restrooms. I know that has been a problem here at South Beach. We were on a 4 times a week schedule. We've gone to a daily schedule. But I will say, it just takes one individual to ruin it for everybody else. So the cleaner could be there in the morning, and the very next person that uses it could foul it up for the rest of the day. So it's a difficult thing. We're going to try and stay on top of it. But, it's not something that we can cure overnight. And then, that's really it. I did list the other recommendations that we made at the end of the report, and we're open for your comments and suggestions.
And I see Councilor Doherty has his hand raised.
I've always got my hand up first. I personally wasn't surprised with the comments about safety. In my 8 years representing people, it's been a current issue, especially in Gonzalez Park, which is quite near to where I live. And, you know, when I go to work in the morning, I pass the plaza and the pavilion, and that seems to be getting turned into quite a, you know, unkempt area as well, just with people lying around asleep or drunk, I don't know. And I can actually foresee the situation getting worse because of the results of a pandemic. You know, there's mass unemployment. It's going to lead to more homelessness. It's going to lead to more people coming to our city. And as we've talked about before, I know Chief Smith, and before that Chief Dooley, and before that Chief Thomason are saying you can't arrest your way out of the problem. But we do have to acknowledge it. And a lot of times we do seem to have a head in the sand mentality when it comes to homelessness. Now, this is just one of these unintended consequences of our homeless issue, is the fact that our residents are now not able to use the facilities that they pay taxes towards. And, you know, I recall when my kids were quite young, I wouldn't let them go over to Gonzalez Park to use the facilities because there were people lying around drinking. And it's pretty sad. So, I mean, I know that it's not Park's fault. I know it's not the police department's fault. You know, is it society's fault? I don't know. But it's something that future councils should actually tackle head on, because I can see the problem getting worse. I can see the parks sometimes being overrun. And, you know, I'd hate to get to that point where something tragic would happen at one of our city parks just because we didn't plan ahead. But on the positive side, reading through the report, I was impressed with how happy, and it seemed to be a large majority of our citizens are happy with our parks, and in particular, South Beach is just a tremendous park. I'm sure a lot of the kids didn't fill in questionnaires, but I just know that my older son, he's a teenager, him and all his buddies hang out there. They think it's the best skate park, or the most rad skate park, whatever, in America. And, you know, we've done a great job there. It's keeping our kids out of trouble. It's giving them something to do. It's a safe environment. And that shows you what we can do when we do get together and plan and put some money into things. So I know there's a few of us that are at the end of our terms here, but this is directed towards people at the start of their terms. You know, hopefully we just continue on, plan and talk and communicate with our citizens as to what direction we need to go. But I appreciate the work, Jason. As always, you do a sterling job. Thank you.
With that, we'll switch over to Councilor Vogelsang.
The only input I have is just because I'm obviously next to Sunshine Park, would be the kids play area with the natural wood that we have. I think we do our best to keep up with that, but obviously it's subject to the elements. And then I had a briefing last week with, I can't remember the agency that we hired that's doing the overhead view of like the CRA and stuff like that. So I talked to them for about an hour. And one of the things I talked to them about was using CRA funding to update that. And I guess they were told that it wasn't eligible for CRA funding because it wasn't built with CRA funds. That's the message that was relayed to me.
That's correct.
So what if we started from scratch and rebuild it with CRA funds? Not obviously this off season, but look into using hardy board instead of real wood and redoing the whole thing. Is just something that I was thinking from a safety perspective, just because we keep replacing boards and it's going to continue to look a little more off as there's new pieces of wood amidst older pieces of wood. The only other thing that I would suggest over there that I hear quite frequently is shade structures. We really don't have any. We put them on the adult swings, but they're not on the toddler swings over there in the toddler area of the park. So most parents don't put their kids on there because the sun's beating down on them during the day. So those aren't really used as much. And then maybe a couple of shade structures by the field, just for people to be able to have an area that sit when they're after playing sports and stuff like that. Those are just a couple ideas I threw out in my meeting, but just in my discussions at the park next to us. Thankfully, we haven't had the vagrant issue like in other areas. I keep an eye on that, and I do think it's an exceptional park. And Jason, I commend you and your team on keeping it and making it what it is. But those are just a couple of things that I hear about from my time over there.
Thank you, Mr. Vogelsang. Yes, we realized that the playground structure at Sunshine is, we basically patching it to keep it alive, so to speak. We put a lot of money into it last a couple of years. But we do have in the CRA budget in 2024, and I'm talking with Bill and mentioned to the CRA during their budget, maybe we can bring that forward, you know, a year or two to replace that structure. And when we do, then obviously, you know, that would include shade and things like that.
Councilor Golding, you're next.
Sorry, forgot to unmute. Thank you, Jason. This report was really great. I really appreciate the fact that you put the comments in two different formats, you know, where we could see it, the comments relative to the particular park, but then we could also see the comments based on the category of comment, which I thought was really good. So being the rep for the north end of the district, was really glad to see that there's more focus on the north end in your summary and recommendations, because you know, Sunshine Park and the whole South Beach Park is really a great place. And I've gone down there for some of the things that the police department has done, like the Halloween get together that they had last year. And it's amazing. For me, it's wonderful to see how the community comes out, and it's a gathering place for the community. And I feel that up in the North District up here, we're lacking that. We don't have that gathering place for residents to be able to go and just, you know, neighbors get together. I think Keith probably would probably agree with that, living in the North District as well. And so my hope is that with this report, we can start looking at some ways that we can try to increase the amenities in the North District, and ultimately that will help to improve the sense of community and you know, the connectivity that neighbors are going to have, because they'll get out and they'll go to these parks and they'll enjoy these parks. The only other thing I would mention is, are we, or a question, I guess, as far as reimagining Gonzalez Park, I mean, are we actually going to look at it that way, as we'd like to reimagine it and maybe come up with a way to make it, you know, improve upon it, other than just some patching, you know, or just putting a few things here and there? I mean, like, is it something where we could potentially get the community involved in discussing some of the things that we would like to do with Gonzalez Park?
Absolutely, Ms. Golding. I think, you know, anytime we want to make an improvement, I think we should try and involve the community to get their ideas. I think it was back in 2009, maybe we paid a consultant, you know, $20,000 to draw the plans. And, you know, I was speaking with staff, I think, you know, we could come up with some ideas, match those with what the community gives us, and come up with something. I'm excited that, you know, that park can be, you know, a signature park on the north end. Some of the things that I think we're going to do immediately that might help is to eliminate one of the baseball fields and make it an all-purpose field where people can throw frisbee, they play lacrosse, soccer, and football, things like that. You probably know we've talked with Sam Beal and his organization are willing, you know, to invest in a pickleball complex for us. To do that, we would need to renovate the restrooms. There are restrooms there that are not currently used by the public. But first and foremost, we need to address the vagrancy problem before we do any of those things. And we're going to work with the police department and with the city attorney and see if, we can enforce some of the regulation that we are proposing in Chapter 20. But yes, we are excited, and I hope that, council will give us the direction to move that project along.
The only other comment I'd make is that, so living in this district, I think Gonzalez Park is a park that is easy to get to because I know I drive by it a lot. I mean, I think a lot of people who live in this district, at least on the east side of Penman, probably use 10th Street a lot. So Gonzalez Park is, at least from an automobile perspective, but I love the fact that, you're talking about the walking and jogging and bike trails. And once we start doing that, adding in that connectivity, then, I think that's going to be great because we'll see people being able to access these parks in other ways instead of cars. And that's pretty exciting. I'd really like to see that happen. Thank you, Jason.
You're welcome.
Mayor Latham.
Thank you, Mike. Jason, I just want to say, as I've said several times in the past and will say again up until about 68 days from now or so, that you've done just a phenomenal job, and you and your staff gathering the data to give us a good, clean look at what the neighborhoods, what the neighbors think, and that's critical. I think that 8 years ago we looked back at where we were. Gary Metters was our director, and things were kind of at a point where they had plateaued for a while, and you really put a spark underneath the projects and really got things turned around very nicely. So thank you very much for that. Getting back to the homeless, because they have such an impact on all these facilities, directly or indirectly. We had a program called CHOP, the Chronic Homeless Offenders Program. And I'm wondering if Chief Smith can give us just a couple of minutes of whether or not it's still working, whether or not it's still engaged. Because when we initiated that program 6+ years ago, there had been a year, at least a good solid year of vetting the program through every legal agency in the county. And it made an impact. And if I recall correctly, our first census that we had after the CHOP program had been implemented for a short period, that the population of the homeless went down significantly, at least for a short period of time. So GP, can you, if you're there, can you tell us whether or not that's still going on?
I believe the police chief is frozen up on us.
Okay. Well, it's something we can discuss later. I think Keith's right. We need to, the new council needs to step up and roll up their sleeves and take this on. I think we did an admirable job of making some trends take place in the early days, worked very hard to get these programs approved so that we could make a difference. If you look at some of if you haven't done it already, go to YouTube and look up Seattle is Dying or Death of Seattle, one of the two. It's about an hour-long video where you're taking one of the most beautiful cities that ever was in the Pacific Northwest, and it's turned into a large landfill with all the people on the side of the street and everything else. Obviously, we're nowhere near that concern, but we don't want to let ourselves get in that direction. So, Mike, I might suggest that you take a few minutes with the chief and talk to him about the CHOP program as at least initial way to get things back on track. And, I agree that that's got to be one of the priorities in the new council. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. And we'll go back to Councilor Doherty.
Yeah, I just had a quick follow-up. To what Sandy was saying. Definitely we need a plan for Gonzalez. Jason, you mentioned there was some consultancy work done 11 years ago, and we're still at this juxtaposition. So I know you're not looking too stressed out these days, so maybe we can add some work on there. And what you're saying regarding the homeless, personally, I think the answer to not having homeless people over on our facilities is for our residents to use them. The reason that we're creating a vacuum, because it's almost like a catch-22. People are afraid to go there because of homeless, but if people go there, like example, if they have lacrosse games, which I've noticed at Gonzalez, there aren't any homeless. So, you know, if we can use our parks and actually, you know, to full effect, and you brought some good things up, maybe pickleball, maybe having a all-purpose field so we can incorporate more sports, maybe a jogging track, I don't know, something to get people out there. And then we won't have to really put extra stress on the police department, because as we've noted time and time again, a lot of these people are repeat offenders. They've got drug, alcohol problems. You know, if our police officers arrest them, they just come back the next day. So I really, you know, I think it's good to talk about it and get the statistics right. But really, if we start just investing time and effort into using the facilities, I think the problem will take care of itself. But I appreciate all you do, Jason. You've done a great job. Thanks, man.
Thank you, sir. And yes, I agree that we are going to keep the ball rolling to see how we can, you know, improve the utilization of that park, along with, you know, a few others like Tall Pines. But thank you.
And before we go back to Councilor Golding, just a reminder that in that report on page 95 is a 1 page of summary and recommendations, which really has 4 major topics. And one of the ones, just to remind council, and while it's a report that's coming to this council, it will likely be brought to the next council as well with regards to future budgeting and CIP projects. But item number 2 on that page 95 is with regards to engaging a consultant to design plans to increase park usage for both Gonzalez Park and Tall Pines Park. So we definitely are looking at more of a reimagining of those 2 locations with substantial community input in both areas, as opposed to just patching it, so to speak, or just putting Band-Aids on it. We really want to make sure it's a community amenity that people west of Penman Road and people in the North District will appreciate going forward. With that being said, Councilor Golding, you were next with your hand raised.
Yeah, just real quick and follow up to what Charlie said. I mean, I hope that the candidates that are running for city council are looking at this as well, since it's, I think, I guess, is this available online? It should be online, right? Because it was with our briefing packet. But I would just like to ask Jason that maybe after the election, we need to make sure that all the candidates who are elected to the city council seats get a copy of this so that they'll have it for their knowledge as well, so that they can hit the ground running with it. Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely.
Councilor Nichols, you are next.
Jason, I just want to reiterate that you guys are doing a great job. I have seen chatter on social media and stuff about like a BMX bike park or a pump track, and just wanted to see, you know, put that in the list of things to do. We do have pickleball courts already, I believe, and, you know, just trying to figure out if there's a place, especially if we're talking about connectivity between the parks with the urban trails, that, you know, really getting kids out to those places are one of the ways to reduce the vagrants from being in those areas. And I mean, I think they would deter a lot of it, and then you get people going between the parks as kind of a through the urban trails. But just an idea.
Absolutely, all good ideas, Mr. Nichols. And yes, we had some of the comments were BMX and the pump tracks and so forth. But yes, we need to reimagine, and my commitment to the council will keep the ball rolling so that, you know, we can fulfill that potential in that park.
And with that being said, Chief Smith is back on the line. Chief, if you wanted to talk a little bit about whether or not the CHOP program is still in effect, and if so, if it's being utilized.
Yes, it's still in effect. The initial drop in homeless, I think, has plateaued in reference to the impact on that problem. You know, I've been dealing with this homeless issue since I was promoted as a sergeant a long, long time ago. And, you know, I've said it before and I'll keep saying it. I have a duty to protect the city and this police department from overzealous enforcement, because the last thing that I want is us to lose a lawsuit from a homeless advocacy group and we end up having arrest-free zones and camping zones similar to Los Angeles and Seattle and some of the big cities, because they've lost lawsuits with homeless advocacy groups. With that said, I think the CHOP program and a lot of efforts like Chapter 20 can get a handle on it. I don't ever see this problem going away. Unfortunately, I've redoubled our efforts in the downtown area and all the parks for patrol and downtown Cape to start getting out there and pressing the flesh, especially after the parks close, to remind them that the new ordinance is coming down, that we don't want to see them in here. And although this new ordinance on Chapter 20 is not a panacea, certainly we can target individuals that are consistent violators of whatever park rules we establish, to where there's really no real rules now. And that includes Latham Plaza, the parks all over the city. So I think we can get a handle on it. We're just as frustrated as y'all are. When I go to different places in the country, and even Waikiki, when I travel home to see my family, probably the most expensive real estate in the world, and they actually have shanties built on Waikiki Beach. It's not just us, which is no satisfaction to anyone on. Nobody wants to hear about anybody else's problems, but we're doing the best we can. I know y'all know that. Just throw a quick stat at you. For the past 2.5 months, my officers have 750 individual homeless contacts alone. That's not counting arrests or anything else. So we're still reminding them that we're still here. We're still contacting them, telling them about services that the Mission House offers, telling them the new people in town, the rules in Jacksonville Beach, and those contacts really speak for themselves. And we're arresting when we can also. So I hope that answers y'all's questions. I know y'all are frustrated, and I'll continue to work on the topic as best we can. And Chapter 20 is going to help a lot, I think.
Any other questions from council on this particular topic? Okay. Jason, I think you've got your directive that we're going to move forward with the recommendations from the report. And we'll also debrief the new council once they get seated after the elections as well. And don't go away, Jason, because the next item, number 4, is yours as well, regarding urban trails. And we've got about 15 minutes or so, because we will need to break about 6:45 to 6:50 in order to set up for the council meeting at 7 p.m. So with that, Jason and Trevor, the floor is yours.
So I'm going to turn it over to Trevor, who's done a lot of the work on the program and he's heading this project up. So over to you, Trev.
Sounds good. Good evening. Urban trails, I've kind of coined it Jack's Beach Connected. Before we get started, the phrase 9 for 9 came up. 9 community outreach meetings, 9 times urban trails were mentioned in all 9 meetings. The desire for an urban trail system throughout our community is, I just think it's awesome. I think it's exciting to be a part of this project, and shows that the community really has a desire for it as well. You can go to the next slide, Jacob. So again, what are we proposing? A non-motorized multi-purpose connectivity. Go ahead and go to the next slide, Jacob. So here, I know that map's kind of big. The biggest comment since we first brought this trail up. Everyone's wanted to call. Everyone wants lines on the map. Everyone wants to see where this map is going. You can see we kind of have a map with no lines, just parks. You can hit play, Jacob. So what we're going to do, we're just going to take a little tour. But the biggest reason we don't have lines on our parks yet is because we just didn't think it would be prudent to put lines without doing all the due diligence. I think that's really the biggest key is we need to come together with Public Works, with planning, with Beaches Energy. We need to sit down, take this map, and look at every opportunity we have. Every single opportunity, from right-of-ways to easements to county easements, utility easements, you know, the boundaries on the golf course, property ownership. We need to sit down and we need to lay out as much as we can every single opportunity. And then once we have that created, working with those three people, then we bring in our residents. We'll bring in council and we'll sit down and really put the details to this plan, put the details to what these urban trails are going to look like. You could go to the next one, Jacob. We'll stop the video short. So again, we're going to involve Public Works, Planning, Beaches Energy to really define any and all opportunities. We're going to meet with our residents and business owners, and the outreach, we don't really have great details because of COVID. We don't know what the restrictions will be like, what they'll look like, but we obviously want the residents and our businesses involved heavily, council involved heavily. We're also going to make sure we're communicating with our neighbors, our other beach communities, and make sure our trails are lining up with some of the ones that we're gonna be putting in. We're also gonna enlist a design professional. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Again, these are all the potential opportunities that we're gonna look at. Go to one more slide, Jacob. So ultimately, we would love to have this massive trail. Obviously, we're in a city that's already developed, and our opportunities to have this great trail would be limited. The reality is some of our trails, go to the next one, may simply look like this, a nice sidewalk up against the road. And other areas, go to the next slide, we're going to have to take a kind of a complete streets mentality. You know, we'll obviously bring in the design experts and allow us to do traffic studies and do all the studies to make sure this is done safely. But I think these are all the opportunities that we have to work with. And I think as long as we adopt and we're willing to do a complete streets and the roadways are for everybody, you know, that's something that would really would give us more opportunities for connectivity. You can go to the next slide, Jacob. So kind of big picture, what's our strategy? You know, first we'll identify, we're going to do public outreach, council consensus. We're going to develop the option plans. And then we'll, from the community outreach, from the option plans that we come up with, that'll give us the details to be able to draw the specs to pick the proper design firm. Go to the next slide. Timeline, you know, we're wanting to get started. Our ultimate goal is by the end of this next fiscal year to kind of have a master plan to bring and vote on. You know, a lot of these things will go on concurrently. That's where we're at, and we're excited to get working on it.
Thank you, Trevor. And I would like to point out to council that in next year's budget, which we've already had the first reading or the first hearing on the budget, we do have $75,000 identified for working with a consultant to help develop that urban trails master plan. So the goal would be to basically use that plan to develop the cross sections of what each of the urban trail segments would look like based on the corridor or the roadway, to identify all the locations that these would be located within, and to also lay out a prioritization of which ones will be proactively pursued and staged accordingly versus trail segments that might be reactive, meaning there's some trail segments that we go in and say we are just going to construct the trail segment now, and there may be other segments that we say we're going to wait 5 to 10 years when Public Works goes in to resurface the road, replace sewer lines or water lines, and that will become our value opportunity of installing the urban trail at that particular point in time to maximize value. So Trevor and Jason are definitely up for the challenge on this particular project. It's definitely integrated and integral with the Parks Assessment project that was just presented to you all, because clearly if we're going to create an urban trail network, we want to make sure that we are connecting valuable assets to other valuable assets that people will actually want to use. I think everyone would agree if you could take an urban trail to Gonzalez Park today, that might not be the best use of creating an urban trail at this point in time, not until there's a horizon for Gonzalez Park to be reimagined. However, there are some other prime corridors that we think, as we go through this exercise over the next 12 months, will rise to the surface as our highest priorities for proactive trail construction. With that, Councilor Doherty, you have your hand raised.
Again, here, I'm glad to hear, Trevor, you're getting rid of the boundaries on the golf course because I'm tired of hitting my ball out of bounds. So good job on that. But in all seriousness, one thing I've noticed during this last couple of months is how many of our residents are actually out running and cycling. And I've noticed particularly on Ocean Drive and First Street, you know, if you go there from 6 in the morning to 8, 9 in the morning, it's just full of people out exercising. So I think the time for this is actually pretty appropriate. One thing that we've identified in the past and we have talked about is the idea of connecting our city across 3rd Street. And, you know, that always seems to be the kind of great difficulty, is like trying to get people safely across A1A. I love the idea of the trails throughout the city, you know, and I know it's not going to be an easy task, but, you know, I'm just really happy that we are talking about it. And again, looking at your timeline, it's probably something that I'm not going to get a lot of input on, but I'm really happy that this project is moving forward. So I appreciate your effort and Jason's effort. Thank you.
Councilor Nichols, you're next.
Yeah, I'm also really very excited about this. And I just think, you know, this is really a great thing for our community. 2 things to keep in mind. The City of Jacksonville tree program. If we can lay out some areas, it's on city property, we can go ahead and get those trees in and, you know, get a couple hundred of those at $2,000 a piece. And, you know, we're saving a lot of money, and we can, if we lay it out, you know, we can get them in pretty quick. And you know, I just think it's a great savings for the community. And the more trees we can get out here, the better it is for everybody. The other thing is that there is an unbelievable amount of grant money out there that are earmarked for exactly these projects, for urban trails and the connectivity and just this bike safety and pedestrian safety. I just, gosh, I don't, there's a company out of St. Augustine or something that they specialize in this stuff. And I mean, I saw a presentation the other day, and the lady was really, really impressive. And she's been able to get a lot of grant money and is very connected at the state level in Tallahassee. And, you know, I just think, you know, instead of just worried about bringing money forward, let's see if we can get some other money from other locations. But I appreciate all y'all's effort. I mean, y'all are just doing a fantastic job.
Thank you, Mr. Nichols. And yes, that absolutely is on our agenda, to look at all federal, state, and other grant funding that may be available. Thank you.
Councilor Golding.
I'll be quick. I just want to say thank you very much. What you presented is exciting, and I'm really thrilled that we're going to be able to see some plans within the next year. I think that's pretty amazing. As somebody who runs, you know, I think that this type of urban trail is going to be great for runners as well. And that's something that I would really love to be able to use. So I'm excited about this. Thank you guys so much for everything that you're doing.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any other hands being raised. So Jason and Trevor, I think you have direction on this item. We shall proceed forward. And if the item gets approved in the budget, we've got our timeline laid out for working with a consultant and developing a plan within the next 12 months. That concludes all of the items that I had for council briefing this evening. It's 6:40. I see a hand raised by Councilor Nichols.
Thank you. There's a, can we look at, what do we need to do to look at the closing of the bars and stuff at midnight now? The rest of the rest of Duval County, everything closes at their normal hours. My concern is people leaving our community and going elsewhere. I stopped by one of those restaurants right on the other side of the ditch the other night. And I mean, you know, they were at their capacity from a COVID standpoint, but you know, we need to do what we can to make sure that our businesses have every chance to survive here through this time. I mean, it's I just, what do we need to do to modify what our current requirements are?
Mayor, I don't know if you want to chime in on that one or not, but I know that from an administrative perspective, we're waiting to see what the governor does with regards to bar openings. He made a statement just the other day in the press that his goal is to get bars opened, technically as bars, not necessarily with the food service or restaurant license designation. We've not yet heard a date from him, or target, or any types of conditions that he'd have for opening. I do know that the closing at midnight was coordinated with the other two beach communities. So clearly, if there's a desire to go in the other direction, we'd probably want to talk to both Neptune and Atlantic as well.
Yeah, I think it's a little strange that the rest of the county, everything is their normal hours.
There are normal hours, but they still have some restrictions imposed by the governor, and that's what we're using as a baseline. Also, I've reached out to DBPR and asked them to send us any information on when they're going to make the change. I think one of the things driving the three beach cities, is the spike. The first time the bars opened up was so substantial that it's got us concerned that we're jumping in early. So the three of us have discussed talking to DVPR or the governor's office, and unfortunately, Governor DeSantis is nowhere as open as Governor Scott was. We could talk to him directly. So I'm reaching through Governor DeSantis's policy office to see if I can get some information from them. But I just think we're setting ourselves up for a real problem if we jump early.
Well, I mean, but we also can hold it to the capacity, and that's really what we need to be functioning on, and not really the time. I don't understand what the time differential, if we're held to 25% or 50% of capacity, as long as we're monitoring that, and you know, I don't see the difference. I don't see why we're different than the rest of Duval County from a time perspective.
Well, if you look at the density of the restaurants and bars in Duval County compared to ours, it's pretty obvious that it's going to have a significant impact here. But as far as the difference is concerned, primarily we're concerned about speaking very frankly, because of the spike. The spike was an indicator that as people would have more to drink, that there would become more of an issue. Then the inhibitions would drop a little bit. And that's one of our concerns now, is that, you know, we just want to make sure that the governor has made the initial decision to limit the restrictions on the bars. And as soon as that's done, the discussion between the three mayors has been, then we would reduce or remove ours as well. That's where we are now. Corey, I'm still waiting on DVPR and the governor's office to reach back to me. We've reached out to them to see if there's some guidance from them on when they're going to change.
And my other concern is just that the PPP money for these businesses, I mean, it's already expired. If we don't get something else, they don't get something else. I just don't think it's, we need to do everything we can to help these businesses stay afloat through this challenging time.
I think it's
Keith, Mr. Doherty, Councilman Doherty, have y'all, what kind of reduction have you all seen on a monthly basis, or or what level are y'all impacted to?
Without being over dramatic, I think a good descriptor would be catastrophic. I've had to lay off 20 employees who are all beach residents, pay rent, have families. One thing you mentioned about the PPP loan, yeah, that affects the business owner. But we've also lost our federal unemployment for people that have been made redundant. And it's not just bars. I mean, we have to be real about this. It's not, you have to look at the drop in hotel numbers. You have to look at the drop in people that deliver linens, people that deliver supplies. I mean, but it's always very easy to vilify the alcohol establishments. But what's actually happened inadvertently with the head of DBPR not being able to do his job, and hopefully this guy gets fired sooner than later, is the reason that he decided to close the bars is because he couldn't enforce. So that's the state's problem. It's not the bar owner's problem. It's not the local municipality's problem. It's the state. And one thing that rang very, very true to me when I watched Governor DeSantis last week is that and this goes to the whole point about time. COVID doesn't know if it's 11 a.m. or 11 p.m. or 1 a.m. So the thing about the time, Charlie, why I agree with you to a point when it comes to if bars are not regulating their capacity. Yes, obviously, if it's a normal Jack's Beach Friday, Saturday night, you're going to get a large influx of people. But let's put the responsibility on the business owners. If they do not adhere to the social distancing mandates and they don't adhere to capacity, they don't adhere to masks, to separation, the DBPR and ATF have been out every weekend inspecting, and nobody's got citations. So put the onus on the business owners so that A, they can make money. B, it's the same thing as when it comes to these rhinos, which we've come full circle now. Now the restaurants are bars and the bars are restaurants, which is the irony here is incredible. But let the business owners police their own establishments, and if they don't behave, then they will lose their license. And I just think, we did show a unified front with the other two beach cities, but remember, Neptune Beach didn't have any bars until Pete's opened last weekend. So it was Elaine had nothing to lose by signing that declaration. And there's only 2 bars in Atlantic Beach that open after midnight anyway. So really, it's Jack's Beach that is the focus. And what I've noticed is a lot of our young folk, as Corey mentioned, are just going over the bridge. So it's not like we're protecting our citizens because they're coming back over at closing time. So really, all it's done is increased house parties, increased people drinking and driving, and really, really put I would say we're 80% down on business because we are a bar and a lot of our business is late night. And so, the time thing, at the start I saw maybe let's get we'll get our house in order. Everybody has done that. And, that spike on Memorial Day was not just because of bars. There was people at beaches, there was people at house parties. That was just the nature of the virus. So for us just to be like focusing on places like bars, I mean, churches are open. You can get sick in a church too. Movie theaters are open. There's places that have a lot of people in there that aren't having the same punitive standards applied. And that's just how I see it. But, hopefully we can turn this corner real quick because you're going to see places going out of business and mass unemployment.
I'm going to, I'll push harder with DVPR and the governor's office and I'll also talk to the other mayors to see what their thoughts are. But,
I appreciate that.
We're looking at this weekly and bi-weekly and, it's not something that we're just putting off in the back. It's you know, I'm going to speak very honestly. I don't mean to put the burden on you. I think the second priority is keeping the businesses up and alive and doing what we can to help. The first priority's got to be keeping this virus, getting rid of it once and for all, and doing our part to get rid of it once and for all. And that's been the motive, certainly.
Sure.
We'll continue to work on it and, you know, keep you posted as we move forward.
I
Mike,
would just
quick-
hope we could be,
quick-
I would just hope we could be consistent throughout the, you know, throughout all of the area and do their best to be consistent throughout Florida. I mean, you've got, you know, instead of us being different from everybody else and being more restrictive, I'd like to help our businesses as much as we can.
I
And
would
be
too, but
equal with everybody else.
we have constituents too, and I've heard from the constituents as well, and that's a big concern for them. And I mean, if you want to think, we're running out of time here before we got a time certain meeting. And it's something that we can bring up, I guess, Mike, if you want to set up another meeting or have it at our next briefing, hopefully we'll have it resolved by then. But it's not something that we're sitting on our hands on. It's something that we're working to try and get resolved. But, you know, we're hearing from public too. I'm hearing from the public.
Here's my thought on that though, too, Charlie. You got the town center is huge for lunch. They don't have a bar scene. It would be like you closing the town center for lunch because it's too crowded because all the businesses need somewhere to go eat.
Yeah.
Yeah, like Keith said, time doesn't matter. I was at the town center for lunch end of last week, and you'd have thought it was a normal day. No pandemic, nothing. And I'm like, this is crazy.
They didn't do social distancing or anything?
There's social distancing as far as the lines go, but the amount of traffic and people I just couldn't believe how many people were there.
Okay.
Which surprised me.
Okay. We'll keep at it. Okay.
And we've actually got, at the next council briefing, I'm hoping to slide in an issue that's pertinent and related directly to this. So if it's not resolved by then, we can have a further conversation at the next briefing related to this topic.
Okay. Thank you.
With that, I think we all get a 5-minute break.